You mentioned that the problem, or one problem, is that we have to account for why we're capable, on the one hand, of these crazy feats like figuring out the Big Bang or creating COVID vaccines fueled by rationality. But then on the other hand, we have QAnon irrationality. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, in the introduction to rationality, you said that our ancestors, or you described our ancestors, the hunter-gatherer ancestors, as cer- cerebral problem solvers. And it seems like something has we evolved to have these features of rationality, but something has changed in our contemporary environment that has resulted in us no longer exhibiting these features at all times.
I put it slightly differently, and even though I am, I make a lot of use of evolutionary psychology in all of my writings, but there is a kind of mean from evolutionary psychology, at least a popular understanding. I think not that many evolutionary psychologists would subscribe to it, that I try to resist, which is we evolved on the savannah. We could get eaten by a lion at any time. Therefore, the human brain is just constantly on the alert to any sign of danger, so we react instinctively, and that's why we fear the wrong things. That's why we act on hunches, because if we didn't, we'd get eaten by predatory cats.
Mm.
Now, I mean, I think there's a grain of truth to that, but it doesn't do our species justice. It doesn't do evolutionary psychology justice, because we are deeply weird mammals, deeply weird primates even. All mammals are nervous at a rustle in the bushes that could portend a predator. But we've kind of gone beyond that. On top of those reflexes, we also figure out how the environment works and try to outwit both predators and prey. And that's why I started the book with a fairly a detailed look into the lives of the San people of the Kalahari Desert, some of the last surviving hunter-gatherers. And based on the fieldwork of Louis Liebenberg, a tracking expert, he noted that there's an awful lot of induction and deduction, and I guess abduction, and debate and deliberation and reasoning from circumstantial evidence, counterfactual reasoning, um, uh, in the process of tracking animals, which he argues was one of the main forms of hunting that the hunter-gatherers engaged in. Since we can't outrun an antelope, they're much faster than we are. However, one advantage that we do have is that we're naked, so we can shed heat. We're bipedal, so we don't have that much surface area being baked by the sun, and we sweat, so we can cool ourselves off. And so antelope are better at the 100-yard dash, but we're better marathon runners.
Right.
As long as we know which way to run. That is, after an animal has darted over the horizon, our ancestors were able to infer from the evidence they left behind, the tracks and other spoor droppings and disturbed shrubbery, which way they probably went, based on kind of deep hypothetical reasoning of what kind of animal was likely to leave the track, what was its condition, what was its likely intention. And so we could slowly and steadily pursue them until they keeled over from heat stroke, and then we could dispatch them with a spear or a rock to the head. But it's cognition that made that style of hunting possible. And Liebenberg suggested that the skills involved in tracking, I don't think it's only involved in tracking, but they're an example of how the hunter-gatherers who are so easy to blame for our fallacies and biases and quick responses actually lived by their wits and had to be pretty smart. Those are the brains that we inherited. And it isn't just in tracking, but also in extracting poisons from plants and insects and certain organs in animals, ways of devising snares and traps, and ways of smoking animals out of burrows, multi-step reasoning that required a pretty sophisticated grasp of cause and effect, the assembly of complex means and ends, and so on. Now, in terms of the modern environment, it's not that we no longer have to figure out how the physical world works. Every time we solve a problem, we've got a wobbly table and we stick a folded up napkin under one of the legs. We're reasoning about our physical environment. Here's what I think is special about the modern environment. It's almost the other way around. It's not that it doesn't have opportunities to apply rationality, but it has opportunities that in realms that our ancestors could not conceivably have applied rationality to, such as what is the ultimate cause of disease and misfortune? What is the origin of the planet and the species? How do plants and animals really work? What happened 100 years ago? How is power wielded, and what are the decision-making processes of the people who have the most power? Now, these are things that in these realms which are beyond our everyday experience. They're not the actual physical things around us. They occur long ago in time, at microscopic scales, at cosmic scales, in remote corridors of power that we can't eavesdrop in ourselves. We very recently have acquired the ability to reason in these more remote, cosmic, hypothetical domains. We've got science, we've got logic, we've got journalism, we've got professional history, we've got archives, records, data. All of these are gifts of the last couple of hundred years, basically since the Enlightenment. But we didn't evolve with those. And so when it comes to reasoning beyond our everyday experience, then I think the default human mindset is reasoning is kind of beside the point because you can't know. There's nothing to go on. There's no evidence anyway. And so myth is a suitable way of understanding the world beyond the immediate senses. That is, what should you believe about why bad things happen to good people? What should you believe about how powerful people have directed the course of history? What should you believe about the origin of humans and of life and the planet? Well, we should believe uplifting morality tales, ones that make you and your people look good. And I think we divide the world into these zones of the immediate experience where we actually are pretty rational, and this more mythological, cosmic, hypothetical, abstract realm where we children of the Enlightenment think, well, we should be rational about that too. We should only believe things that are true. We should try to determine whether our beliefs are true. We should look at evidence. We should develop better analytic tools. That's what is foreign to the human psyche. And their evolution is relevant. Namely, forget 10,000 years ago, 200 years ago, there was nothing to go on. And so it's not surprising that we don't naturally think that these domains are proper applications of human rationality.
Returning for a moment to the Bushmen you were speaking about, do you conceive of the cognitive biases we alluded to earlier as shortcuts in a sense that just in fact don't cause problems most of the time for people like these Bushmen, but that save on cognitive resources? Is that why we evolved them?
I actually don't think I wouldn't put it exactly that way. That is, I don't think they are saving on cognitive resources because again, going back to the sun, they think long and hard about which animal left those tracks, or whether it's fresh or tired or old or young or male or female. I want to move away from the idea that we only that we're constantly conserving mental resources, though we do. But I don't think that's the only problem. It's before there was science, before there were data sets, what did you have to go on? The heuristics and biases that people like Tversky and Kahneman have documented aren't necessarily shortcuts. They're the best you can do before science existed, or if you don't know about scientific resources. So, for example, let's be concrete. The one of the major biases that I have written about is the availability bias or the availability heuristic, namely to estimate probability or risk. You see how of a particular kind of event, you recall an instance of that event, an anecdote, an image, and whatever is most available in memory is you use that as your estimate of how likely it is. So is it dangerous to swim in the ocean? Well, I read last week about someone who was eaten by a shark, so yeah, it really is dangerous. As opposed to looking up the data, comparing, say, how likely are you to get eaten by a shark compared to how likely are you to die in a car crash driving to the beach? The car crashes don't tend to attract the attention that the shark attacks do, and so our heads are turned by the gory, vivid, memorable anecdote. Now, I don't think it's saving time or saving resources. I think it's, how many people have access to those data? How many people know that such data exists? Well, some do now, but no one did 100 years ago because those data didn't exist. There weren't government record-keeping agencies that kept track of deaths from different causes. And that was not true not just 100 years ago, but 1,000 years ago, and 10,000 years ago, and 100,000 years ago. So our intuitions about probability and risk are fed by what we have to go on, namely our own experience together with the rumor and hearsay that is the experience of other people. That's all there was. And so that's still what comes naturally to us. We have to be educated into the fact that we are the lucky beneficiaries of data, and and even then, often data sets can be distorted by their own kinds of biases. But that's not a natural lesson to learn. To go to it used to be go to an almanac, now it's go to the internet and look up the best data. Now, it's not surprising that that's not instinctive or not intuitive. I'll mention one other reason that some of these heuristics and biases aren't just shortcuts. They're not just ways of saving cognitive effort. The other reason, and this is pointed out by Gerd Gigerenzer, is that they're going to the data is inherently uncertain because the question is which data. If I want to look at, say, what's likely to kill me, should I look at data for Americans? Should I look at data for men? Should I look at data for men in their 60s? Should I look for the data for Ashkenazi Jews? Should I look for the data for Ashkenazi Jews with a family history of heart disease? Like, which data do you look at? And there's no correct answer, because the smaller the category, obviously the more relevant the data are, but the smaller the category, the fewer the data there are and the noisier the estimates. Now, when it comes to anecdotes, things that you've actually lived through, or things that you've heard about from people in your neighborhood, people like you, it has a built-in advantage that it's far more applicable to you. Now, the disadvantage, of course, is that it's a small sample size, sometimes only one, but it's just part of the trade-off between specificity and reliability, way over in the direction of specificity. But it's not inherently irrational, and it's not just a question of saving a few milliseconds of decision time.